A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. Random House Audio presents Star Wars: Red Harvest by Joe Schreiber. Read for you by John Glover. Chapter 1. Ring. 3645 BBY. Wim Nictor stood just outside the circle, awaiting first blood. The cold morning air of Odacer Faustin tasted like ozone, numbing his tongue and lips, making his heart pound harder in his chest until it actually shook the heavy fabric of his wind-resistant tunic. He had climbed the 77 steps to the top of the temple with the other students, muscles aching, sweat from his exertions still drying in the wind. The lightsaber training session was over. Now the duels would begin. In the 3 standard years since he'd arrived at the academy, Nictor had come to appreciate these duels with a special kind of excitement. A tall, rangy 17-year-old with a thatch of jet-black hair, he gazed into the circle with hungry blue-gray eyes that matched the unforgiving landscape almost perfectly. Nictor looked down. From the top of the temple, the Sith Academy resembled nothing so much as a partially demolished wheel, its spokes radiating crookedly out from the central hub of the tower. Its ancient chambers, enclosed walkways, tunnels and temples, and the great library that served as its haunted heart had all long ago begun to crumble and deteriorate from decades of accumulated snow and ice and the constantly shifting tectonic eccentricities of the planetary crust. The result was a sprawling ruin of forgotten spaces, some of them palatial, groaning under tons of age-tortured Sith architecture. It was here that they'd come, Nictor and several hundred others, to learn everything they needed to know about the dark side of the Force. Directly across from him, Lord Shakwith, the Sith Blade Master, took 3 steps forward into the open space, turning to regard the students from beneath the hood of his cloak. For a moment the wind had fallen still. All was quiet except for the scrape of his boots across the flat, uneven surface. The Blade Master's stony countenance betrayed no hint of expression. The thin, lipless slit of his mouth never moved. No comment was made, nor was any needed. This was the moment when the first challenge would be made, and Nictor, along with all his peers, had heard the rumors. This was the day that Lusk was going to issue his challenge. Rance Lusk was the Academy's top student, a Sith acolyte of such fierce promise and potential that few, if any, dared approach him, let alone face him in a duel. These days he spent most of his time in private training sessions with Shakwith and the other masters at the Academy. Some said that he'd even sat in meditation with Lord Scabrous himself up in the tower, although Nictor had his private doubts about this last bit. He hadn't met a student yet who actually claimed to have been inside the tower. Even so, he waited, holding his breath. The group had fallen absolutely silent. A moment later, Lusk stepped forward. He was an agile, muscular figure in a robe and tunic, with a long face and flaming red hair that he'd grown long, pulled back and kept braided so tightly that it pulled on the corners of his pale green eyes, giving them a slightly slanted look. But his most outstanding feature was the self-contained silence that hovered around him like a lethal cloud. To approach him closely was to experience a climate of dull dread. The 1 or 2 times Nictor had accidentally bumped into Lusk in the halls of the Academy, He'd actually felt the temperature drop along with the oxygen content. Lusk emanated menace. He breathed it out like carbon dioxide. Nictor felt his whole body fall still, save his pounding heart, as Lusk turned slowly to regard his fellow acolytes with an indifferent, almost reptilian stare. As far as opponents went, there were only a few worthy of his time. Lusk's gaze passed over Jura Ostrogoth, Skopik, Nace, Rat, some of the most skilled duelists in the group. If challenged, Nictor wondered, would any of them accept? The humiliation of backing down was nothing compared with the potential catastrophe of losing to Lusk in the circle. In his hands, even a training blade with its durasteel shaft and millions of microscopic toxin-filled barbs could deal out disastrous injury. Lusk stopped, and Nictor realized that the red-haired acolyte was staring at him. Lusk's words hung in the air. "I challenge Nictor." At first, Nictor was certain that he'd misheard. Then the reality sank in, and he felt his innards drop, as if the ground itself had abruptly vaporized beneath his feet. Time seemed to have stopped. He was aware of Shakwith and all the apprentices turning around to look in his direction, waiting for him to step forward or back down. As a purely practical matter, Lusk's selection made no sense. Although he could hold his own in practice, Nictor was clearly the other student's inferior, providing no opportunity to hone his skills or even offer the others a good performance. Still, the challenge hovered in the air between them, unanswered. "Well, Nictor," the Blade Master asked, "what do you say?" Nictor lowered his head, feeling a slow, familiar warmth crawl into his cheeks and neck. He was aware that a formal reply wasn't necessary. Simply bowing his head and stepping back would be answer enough, and a moment later the whispers would begin as what little prestige he'd managed to garner here in the last 2 years began to evaporate around him. It was an unwinnable dilemma, of course, but at least this way he would walk away intact. Several of Lusk's previous opponents hadn't been so lucky. The last 3 had left the academy after losing to him. 1 had taken his own life. It was as if losing to Lusk had done something to them, inflicted some profound inner wound from which there was no recovery. The answer was obvious. Nictor would just step backward and bow out. And so he was as shocked as any of them when he heard himself say, "I accept." The murmur of surprise rippled audibly through the other apprentices. Even Shakwith cocked one thorny eyebrow. Nictor blinked, unable to believe what he just said. He hadn't meant to speak at all. The words had bubbled out of him involuntarily. Looking up at Lusk, seeing the slightest hint of a smile curling at the corners of that small, unremarkable mouth, Nictor realized that, of everyone here, only Lusk was unsurprised by his response. And for the first time, Nictor saw what was happening. This wasn't about dueling at all. It was about something else entirely. "Well then," Lusk said, beckoning with his free hand. "Come on." Before he knew it, Nictor felt himself being sucked forward into the ring, one foot and then the other, dragging the rest of his body along with it. His heart raced as his body registered that this was actually happening. "No," his mind protested. "I'm not doing this. I don't want this." But that didn't matter, because all he could see now was Lusk's smile, broadening enough to show a faint yellow glint of canines behind the lips. Nictor knew what was going on, and what was worse, Lusk knew that he knew. Lusk's eyes were braziers of pure, sadistic pleasure, and their intensity transformed his otherwise plain face, distorting it somehow, making it appear horrible. They were face to face now, close enough that Nictor could feel that terrible coldness spilling out of Lusk's pores, and Lusk raised...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?